I'd taken a day of leave in 1984 to take my son to the Smithsonian Institute, air power portion of Smithsonian. And we'd been there about an hour, and I was paged. Well, I got the call back and said, General Mahaffey, who was the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Operations, wants to see you. I said, I'm on leave. We don't care. I said, I'm in corduroys and a sweatshirt. We don't care. You need to come to the Pentagon. So I took my son, who was about 12 at the time. We go to the Pentagon. I take him to my desk. The guys there put him on a computer, which were new at the time, and let him sit there. I went to see General Mahaffey, and he said, there's a special clearance for a special operation, and the Army, we picked you. I don't know anything about it. I can't talk to you about it. You go see the Chief of Staff of the Army. So I go see General Wickham, and I'm the only person other than General Wickham is going to have a clearance. And we had a code name, and we had to take a special oath. Because of all the leaks in the Pentagon, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs had decided we're going to do something. We're going to keep it close knit. So each service was allowed to designate one officer to be their special agent. I was the Army's. The Marine Corps picked my counterpart, another lieutenant colonel. And the Navy picked a captain who was knowledgeable of the topic. His subordinate was my counterpart. And then Air Force picked a 2-star general. So the 4 of us were called a meeting, and the 4-star Air Force general couldn't believe it. Well, why is he even involved? Because all of us worker bees, we knew what the action was. So we worked with the chiefs to prepare a letter, and actually wrote the letter for the chairman to sign to go directly to President Reagan because of all the leaks. So what the Joint Chiefs says, this is what we suggest and recommend, Mr. President. So we wrote the letter on one Christmas Eve that was taken to President Reagan. It sure wasn't leaked. I never heard anything about it. But as far as the input from the chiefs, because otherwise, from the DOD were some hardliners, Richard Pearl, Frank Gaffney, the chiefs could not get anything the way they wanted it to the president without it being filtered. And so in that case, they at least told President Reagan what they would support in this letter, which I wouldn't go into. From that, I was assigned to, got promoted to colonel, and I was assigned to the Joint Staff to be branch chief of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces branch. And I had 4 Army officers and 1 Air Force officer, all lieutenant colonels under me, and we provided support for working on the INF Treaty. And I always sent 2 of them over there as advisors. And during that time, I was a Joint Chiefs of Staff representative to the Special Commission that met in Brussels about every 6 weeks to implement modernization of forces while at the same time implementing arms control. In other words, it was decided by Margaret Thatcher and President Reagan that we will build our forces up. If we don't, we won't get what we need from the Russians, because they had the SS-20 3-warhead missiles, which were really potent, aimed at us in Europe. And so we were modernized from the Pershing 1A to the Pershing 2, and it was decided, the Germans especially, we do not want to be the only NATO country with nuclear weapons. So it was agreed that the basing countries would be Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, the UK, and Germany. And the countries, the UK, Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy decided to put ground-launched cruise missiles, the Glickem, as we call them. So they were all put in, all those countries except Holland, they were still building their facility when the treaty was signed. So that was going on while the treaty was being negotiated, and I helped push the Russians towards the elimination of all those weapons in Europe, which is what was really President Reagan's mindset, and Gorbachev agreed to eliminate those weapons from both sides. So during the last stages of the negotiation, I actually went over with one of my officers to be on the negotiating team. And I was there at the conclusion of the negotiations in Geneva. And I'd worked with those Russians now during that time frame. And we worked on the treaty till late, about 5 o'clock in the morning, about the 5th of December. And we're still initialing pages of the treaty. I bid my counterpart farewell that morning, gave him a bottle of Jack Daniels, and shook his hand and bid farewell. And we were getting ready to load the C-141 to head back to Washington, all of us with all our luggage. We all had about 4 suitcases. So I had like 5 suits, a bunch of clothes to wear, because we didn't wear uniforms in Geneva. You're not allowed. We all had to wear business suits. So we had all that luggage. And we got word from the Russians, says, oh, we got a problem. We can't get an aircraft here to take our copy of the treaty. So it was coordinating with Washington. How about we let the Russians fly on the 141 with us? So Ambassador Bukov, General Medvedev, a secretary, and an interpreter joined us on the C-141 and flying back with their copy of the treaty, our copy of the treaty, in a C-141 with a first lieutenant flying the plane. And we allowed the general and ambassador to go up there. They couldn't believe it. A lieutenant's flying this plane. We got a treaty going to be signed by 2 presidents, and here we are. And the ambassadors were still initialing the copy of the treaties, and I got a photograph of them initialing the copy of the treaties while en route back to Washington. And we were trying to beat Gorbachev in landing at Andrews. We were somewhere over France when the last pages were initialed. We all on the delegation got a copy, one of the pens that the ambassador signed his copy of the treaties with, which is a souvenir for us. But we didn't make it. We landed about 3 hours behind Gorbachev. And of course, 2 days later, the 8th of December, the treaty was signed. And upon that, organization had to be established, which we sent a detail back to work on it. One of my officers started in December to work on the organization, which came to be the On-Site Inspection Agency, OSIA, to be under the Secretary of Defense. And we started from scratch with a 1-star general, Army general appointed, General Roland LaJoy, who was a Soviet specialist and never commanded above a company level, but he was a Russian speaker, a diplomat, and he was put in charge, and a bunch of us colonels, and we got NCOs, we got FAO officers, Foreign Service officers, they knew Russian, started forming, and we had a first facility we could find was the Coast Guard headquarters at Washington Channel and Anacostia River. So we were housed on the first floor of the Coast Guard building during our first year of life at OSIA. I was the Director of Operations, responsible for planning, training, and execution of all the missions in the Soviet Union, and the same on the reciprocal part for all the U.S. escort. I had a colonel in Washington, Air Force colonel that ran the escort for Washington, point of entry. I had a Lieutenant Colonel Air Force at Travis Air Base to run that operation. I had a full colonel Frankfurt to run all the NATO escort duties in all the basing countries from Frankfurt. So I had all those people working under me. I had about 10 teams, all headed by lieutenant colonels or Navy commanders who were all Russian speakers, who formed teams made up of other FAOs, missile specialists, NCOs from all the services, anyone that worked on missiles, or people we got, warrant officers from Persian, we got missile leaders from ICBM, silos, so forth, Polaris submarine guys. I don't think we had any Trident guys at the time, but we had across the board, Navy, Marines. We had one Coast Guard Lieutenant JG, but mostly Air Force and Army, few Marines and Navy. and we probably took almost all the Russian interpreters in all the Defense Department and formed them in this organization. But we executed the treaty. It was a great responsibility. I led teams when I wanted to. I went to the Soviet Union and then to Russia. I saw the Soviet Union collapse. I was in East Germany 1 month before the Berlin Wall fell. I was in Czechoslovakia 2 months before it became Czech Republic and Slovakia. I went to places in Soviet Union and Russia when it was Soviet Union. I went there when it was Russia. I saw the change. I worked with the same people. I saw how they changed, and at one point I thought, oh, this is going to work out. It's going to actually be a democracy. We know that's not to be as it came about with Putin. But for one point in time, in any case, during all this time of dealing with the Russians, the leaders, of course, they had some crummy intel guys, and of course we know they had KGB people on their team and so forth, but on the counterpart, we had the people we needed to have on our teams to do the job. But as far as the professional soldiers, the colonels, they were mostly artillerymen like me. They commanded units. They were artillery people. We had respect for each other. I knew the treaty, General Medvedev, because he was the number 2 person on the delegation in Geneva, and he headed the Nuclear Risk Reduction Center for the Soviet Union. On our side, I was the only one who had worked on the treaty that actually did inspections in the Soviet Union. So the general and I had a special relationship, and when he'd come on missions, I would treat him to dinners. For instance, in Washington, I took him to Quantico to the museum. I took him out to dinner in Brussels to meet the ambassador. I could do things like that in payback. Over the years, when they knew I was retiring, I was invited to the Nuclear Risk Reduction Center in Moscow, and the Russians gave me a retirement reception. They videotaped it, gave me photographs, and a farewell. And in the same token, I had sent certificates signed by the general appreciation for those colonels on their side that started retiring. But and we coordinated the final elimination parties in 1991. I had worked with the Russians. Look, let's make a celebration out of the last destruction of your missiles, and we will do the same. So I coordinated with them. Let's don't conflict. Let's make sure we have time between. I think we had like 2 weeks apart. So we did the Russian one, and when they came, we did in Marshall, Texas, outside of Marshall, Texas, at the Longhorn Ammunition Plant near Caddo Lake in Texas. And that's where the last missile was destroyed, and we had a ceremony. The town of Marshall had a big barbecue, invited the whole city. We had the Fort Sill band come down, and we treated the Russians to a tour of houseboats on Caddo Lake, catfish fry, you name it. That was quite a send-off in 1991 for the end of the destruction of the missiles. But that was 2 years before my final retirement and my final celebration and my informal retirement with my unit, OSIA, and outside at Dulles Air Base at the motel across the street. I think I had 17 or 18 Russian visitors, including my counterpart was there to celebrate my retirement. And of course, I have a video of that, have pictures of that to remember the good days and the bad days. But I never had a serious situation in dealing with the Soviets. I never had one defect, which was always a concern. And whenever the Russians were around, I always had an FBI. You can see the FBI hats behind me here, because I treated FBI counterintelligence agents with a lot of respect, and I put them on teams to go to the Soviet Union so they could learn about the Russians. I had some who had worked double spies. One agent had actually lost a spy. It was a double agent in Georgetown. He was on one of my teams. So I had people like that, and knew only one side of the Russians. They didn't know what it was like over there, so they got to go on teams one at a time. I would put a FBI agent on a team. We could have 2 inspectors on the list at any one time 2 aircraft members to fly aircraft on the list at any time, and basically we would change those, update them once a month. And so if I had a friend I did have a friend, PhD guy, worked with me in nuclear weapons, and I said, "Hey, John, would you like to go on a mission?" Sure. So I put him on a mission because I knew what he did and what he knew about the Soviets. So that's the kind of thing that could happen.